Hey guys, it's Liv here, and in today's video, I'm going to be ranking every single ground-type Pokemon in Pokemon, just in general, as of Generation 8. So if you guys enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, leave a like below and subscribe. And with that said, let's get started. First off, I do want to obviously go over what the different tierings mean. So if we have a Pokemon in S+, this is basically going to be a Pokemon that, defines Ubers. S is going to be for Pokemon that are either pretty good in Ubers, or at the very least, are, somewhat top tier in OU. A is going to be for Pokemon that are pretty viable in OU or really, really bad in Ubers. I'm talking about if they were a usage tier, they would have dropped several times by now. B is for Pokemon that are pretty good in lower tiers. C is for Pokemon that are okay in lower tiers. D is for Pokemon that are either not bad in PU or some sort of tier like that, or for at the very least Pokemon that are NFEs that I felt were better than completely unusable. And F is going to be for Pokemon that are completely unusable. So let's start with our first option, being regular Sandslash. This is a D tier Pokemon in my opinion. This is one of those things that ends up being pretty good when you get really down to the bottom of tiering, but it's not something you would ever really use outside of a PU NU sort of thing. And even then, it's probably usually just a PU thing. Cool Spiker, cool Rocker, Rapid Spin option. It's really good budget sand if you really wanted to go that route. It's not terrible. I just don't think it's great. Nidoqueen, on the other hand, this is a Pokemon that definitely, as I said, sees a lot of lower tier usage, typically in your RU, sometimes your UU range. It's pretty decent in my opinion. Not really a Pokemon that I would say defines competitive or anything, but it's definitely not bad, and it would be an understatement to say anything besides the fact that it's a pretty good lower tier Pokemon. Next up we have Nidoking. Nidoking gets a B. I do recognize this has been OU at different points in the generation in Sword and Shield, but typically this isn't where Pokemon ends up residing, so I can't really give it an A ranking. So I feel like the B makes the most sense. This is a Pokemon you typically do see in your lower tiers, and it's still a pretty good Pokemon in competitive. You'd be pretty hard pressed to find a meta where Nidoking is at least anywhere below RU, and even if it is RU, it's typically running the tier. So I think that Nidoking is pretty good in my personal opinion. Next up is Dugtrio. Now Dugtrio technically is a pretty terrible Pokemon, however Arena Trap itself is a really broken ability. I'll give this A rank, not that I think it's good, it's not even good in Ubers, but it ended up getting banned in OU, so I'd be pretty hard pressed to put it in any other tier. Alolan Dugtrio, this is actually going to be our first F-rank Pokemon in my opinion. I do realize this has some use when you get to the really bottom tiers, but even still, this is just not a great Pokemon in my opinion. I think it's objectively worse than regular Sandslash. We have Golem. Golem's pretty cut and dry. It's a D-rank Pokemon. Anything with Sturdy this gen is pretty good, especially with Sturdy Boost. You get that guaranteed hit, even if you're not leading with it and you want to get a Brock Slater. Or you can still just go with the lead to Custap, and again, it's a pretty good Pokemon. I'd probably rank this below Sandslash still there, just because Sandslash is weather, which is pretty uncommon for lower tiers, especially good at it, because we have options like Stoutland, obviously, but Stoutland's pretty terrible. Marowak gets another, I would say this is D rank, and it's mostly just because this is a kind of okay Pokemon in doubles when you get really far down in usage. I've actually seen a couple Marowak in VGC this gen. Even still, the Thick Club is pretty undeniably a good item in Marowak, and it makes it at least not a terrible Pokemon. Just because you're going to be kind of really desperately looking for Pokemon that can break as well as Marowak can in the low tiers. So I feel like Marowak at least gets the bottom of D, but I'll tell you right now, this is going to be the lowest ranked Pokemon in D, in my personal opinion. We have Rhydon up next. Rhydon's not terrible. I would put it somewhere between Golem and Marowak. Rhydon obviously having a Violate, it makes it already at least a somewhat usable Pokemon. The typing is pretty good. The stat line's pretty good physically, defensively. In fact, I'm actually going to lump right now Piloswine in with this as well, just slightly above. Actually, I'll put Piloswine above Golem, to be fair, but these basically just do the same thing, just Piloswine does the job better. But they're both meant to be a Violet ground types that are really good in the lower tiers, but you're never going to really see them outside of NU, PU sort of range. But they're both objectively good Pokemon down there. Next up we have Quagsire. Now, I know a lot of people are probably expecting Quagsire to go in D tier because, Quagsire is typically a Pokemon that will surge out of low tiers, but I think off the fact that it can actually surge into upper tiers alone, I'm going to put this in C rank. It's definitely not in the same tier as the likes of Sandslash, Piloswine, Rhydon, etc. This Pokemon does actually have OU usage, but at the same time though, this Pokemon is typically in itself a Pokemon that would be NU quality. It's just there are certain metas that are so kind to Quagsire where it has to surge up. So I feel like that C rank is pretty fitting for it. I don't know where it'll fit in C rank personally, but I think as of right now, at least below Nidoqueen is pretty reasonable. We up next have Gligar. Now, Gligar is a little bit different. I'm going to put Gligar... This is probably going to be our bottom C rank Pokemon personally. Gligar is definitely better than the other Violet grounds we've mentioned thus far, such as Piloswine and Rhydon, but it's still not a great Pokemon. Now, if this had Poison Heal instead of Immunity, this would honestly probably be like a really high B tier Pokemon, considering the Violet plus the passive healing would be amazing for it. However, Gligar's stat line is still just underwhelming in every single department, where it misses out by like 10 base in every stat to really be viable. A Violet does help a lot with that, obviously, but it's not really going to be some good breaker or some really hard wall. It's just going to do a lot of nothing, but just instead of doing everything. Poison Heal, again, I think would really make this Pokemon amazing, but for now, it's just going to be a low C rank Pokemon. Next up is Steelix. Now, Steelix, I get that I mentioned that for D rank is typically Pokemon that are really good in like the NUP range, but Steelix is like what I would call a meta definer for those, so I'm actually going to put it in C. This is still viable in RU anyway, so I don't think that this is exactly too out there of a claim. And I'm going to put Mega Steelix right above it, literally just directly above it actually. I think that makes the most sense. I know I said that Gligar would be the bottom of C, but I forgot that Steelix is going to be here too. But realistically, the Steelixes are both pretty even in terms of quality. Typically, you'll see Mega Steelix in RU and regular Steelix in NU, but they both have viability typically in the RU sort of range when they've been allowed. So I don't think this is exactly too out there personally. Next up, we have Donphan. Donphan definitely goes above Quagsire, and it's going to be a C rank Pokemon. Again, pretty decent Pokemon as far as like RU range goes. Typically, this is an RU, sometimes UU Pokemon, but it's typically RU. Sturdy is pretty amazing on this. Obviously, you know, in Nat decks, you could definitely go with like Sturdy Boots, but you'd more likely just end up using this in the next generation because not a lot of people play the low tier Nat decks metas as far as I'm aware. The point being though is it's definitely a pretty good Pokemon as far as lower tiers go. Next up we have Swampert. Swampert's definitely a low B tier, with Mega Swampert actually being a low A tier. I think the rain really does help a lot this generation Mega Swampert, and I think that as generations have went on, Mega Swampert has only gotten better. Especially this gen, where in Gen 8 it has flip turn access, and you could definitely run this in OU with stuff like Koko, Megapert, Ashgren, and really just tear through teams. I remember running a team with like Zapdos, Ashgren, and I feel like Megapert could obviously be a pretty damning option on that with flip turn. And Swampert still is a pretty good Pokemon as far as, you know, Sword and Shield meta goes. It's a pretty good Pokemon in OU or UU, depending on the tier you play. I believe it's currently in the UU tier, but I know for a fact it's had metas, even if it's not right now, it's had metas where it's been. And I think Swampert's still definitely one of those Pokemon that is really good. Yeah, it's currently UU. It's really good in UU, and it's still a not terrible Pokemon in OU. I would definitely say this is, at least in my opinion, just right below Nidoking. For pretty similar reasons, it's just a worse version of Nidoking in my opinion, in the sense that it's like a Pokemon that is UU quality, but will sometimes search OU. But they're pretty uncomparable in terms of their roles, because obviously Swampert's meant to be more of a defensive ground with potential to do damage, and Nidoking's meant to be an offensive ground with potential to take hits. So they're pretty much the inverse of each other, actually. Next up we have Camerupt. Camerupt's literally just below Dugtrio, but Mega Camerupt is probably just going to be top of D. I love Mega Camerupt. I think it's an amazing breaker. Regular Camerupt sucks. It literally kind of take a hit. It can't really do damage out that well. But Mega Camerupt Sheer Force is actually pretty amazing at just making sure that opponents can't really switch it on you. And the 4 times weakness to water doesn't really matter if you get a Trigger Mump and you're just outpacing everything. So I think Mega Camerupt's an easy top of D tier, and regular Camerupt just sucks. Trapinch is one of those like really baby Pokemon that I said earlier had use above the F rank at least. This is probably going to be our very bottom Pokemon in D rank, to be honest. But at the very least, trapping is something that the other 2 Pokemon can't do. So objectively speaking, it has one job it can do, which the other 2 fail to even do that much. So I had to rank it. That's really all it has going for it, to be honest. But it has 100 attack. It's basically Flygon's attack. And you can throw a Violet on it, or a Focus Sash, and you can claim a kill with Earthquake. That's better than the other 2 can do. Next up we have Flygon. Flygon's a pretty good low tier Pokemon, actually. This is typically a Pokemon you'll find in like the RU range, sometimes NU, but typically in the RU range. It has a lot of roles going for it this generation, such as Scarf Defogger or just Bulky Defogger in general. It's a good Scarf option. Dragon Dance, obviously. I think it's a pretty decent RU Pokemon personally. Especially early on in the generation, this was actually not a bad option considering there were so few Pokemon around. And I think Flygon definitely has potential. It's just a lot of other Pokemon do its job as well. And it's just slightly better than Flygon does. But I think as a Pokemon, Flygon's actually not terrible. So I gotta give it C rank. The fact that it can, you know, force a ground and throw on Dragon Claw is already something pretty useful that not a lot of Pokemon can do. So Flagon has usage right off of that alone. Whiscash, fucking awful. It's above Camerupt because it's 4 times weakness, at least is better than Camerupt's. Claydol gets at the very least above Marowak, actually above Rhydon. Claydol being a good low tier spinner is actually pretty good. If this had recovered, this would honestly probably be a C tier Pokemon, but it doesn't. It has no reliable recovery. It has amazing coverage though. It has Rocks, has Rapid Spin. It has a pretty cool ability in Levitate too. Just giving it immunity is amazing, especially when you already have the Electric immunity. Having 2 immunities is pretty hard to find as far as a low tier Pokemon goes. So again, I gotta give it to Claydol. This is pretty good in my opinion. Just, you know, lacks recovery. Groudon's our first S-rank Pokemon. It's a pretty decent Pokemon as far as Ubers goes. In fact, it's a fucking amazing as far as regular Sword and Shield Ubers goes. But the Pokemon that are being in S+ are so much better than it by a margin, such as Primal Groudon, that I objectively cannot rank this Pokemon in anything besides S. It's still really good, and it's still honestly just outclassed by Pidon. So I can't rank them in the same tier. I think that would be pretty stupid. Next up, we have Torterra. Torterra gets like right above Marowak. Actually, yeah, it gets right above Marowak as far as D tier goes. And this is mostly for the fact that the meta that it's allowed. Actually, it's allowed in BBSP, and it's pretty good in BBSP. I can actually rank it probably above Claydol. Because I was thinking of Natdex is really the only meta this is allowed in. And in Natdex, you still have hidden powers, but BBSP doesn't, and it's pretty not terrible in there. In fact, I'm actually going to move it above Piloswine, I think, because I know this does have usage in BDSP. I'm pretty sure it's like a BDSP RU Pokemon, which no one really plays the meta, but I know it's ranked there. But Torterra's not terrible. It's used in a tier that no one plays it in. But it's at least probably still worse than Sandslash, because Sandslash has dual hazards at least, and not a 4 times weakness. But even still, it not needing to run a Violate is pretty useful, but Piloswine, not needing to worry about only having 1 attack to go off because of Golem having sturdy and like no recovery, whereas Torterra has recovery and pretty good bulk, makes it better than Golem. Having recovery at all makes it better than Claydol. And then again, similar for Rhydon, just, you know, it's just a mix of Golem and Piloswine. And since it is 4 times weakness to grass and water, but it also needs a Violet. So yeah, I think Torterra's better than these. Next up is Wormadam. Pretty terrible. I know like one person who's ever made this Pokemon somewhat usable, but even still, it was the Bug Steel one. So it's probably like the worst Pokemon in the whole list, to be honest. Gastrodon's a pretty good Pokemon. I can't lie, I know this is one of those Pokemon that, similar to Quag, it has Surges in OU, but it also never really dips to as low as Quag does. So I think in good faith, I gotta put it in B tier. Gastrodon's a Pokemon that typically will never be unviable in a metagame. Albeit, you're never really seeing this like dominating OU or anything, but you'll never see it unviable in OU either, in my opinion. Not only this, but you'll typically see it have usage in UU as well, and usage in RU, and that's typically where it will reside. So I think that unlike something like Nidoqueen, where it's just sitting in RU, or something like Quagsire, where it can just have metas where outright is unusable in OU, I think a Gastrodon at least should be a tier above, because I do think that should help reflect how good this Pokemon is. Next up is Mega Garchomp. Well, we'll do Mega Garchomp first because it's quicker. I'm going to put this right above Mega Swampert, and I'm going to put Garchomp actually right above Dugtrio. I think the difference being is that Garchomp is actually fairly usable in a lot of different metagames. It's one of the best in BDSP. It's one of the best in Sword and Shield. It's a pretty damn good Pokemon in National Dex, and especially with Z-moves, I think this Pokemon is actually just better than Dugtrio, personally. And I'm kind of shocked that Dugtrio is actually banned, but I get it's just a trapping thing, just be consistent with trapping. It's still not that great. Mega Garchomp, on the other hand, I think it's just below Dugtrio in terms of quality, and I think this generation, especially having Scale Shot, it really does give Mega Garchomp actually a whole breath of fresh air, considering in National Dex this is actually a pretty viable meta. As far as a Mega Pokemon goes, this having insane bulk, really good 170 breaking, and if you get a Scale Shot off in an SD, most teams can't really handle this. And not only that, but the fact that you could choose between either just going for cleaning with Scale Shot and just going with 170 attack and ripping teams, or just going for a Sword Stance and blowing through any sort of walls, I think that Mega Garchomp definitely has seen an actual surge of usability, in my opinion. And in terms of comparing it to Garchomp, it's one of those things where Garchomp basically needs a Z move to break as well as Mega Chomp does, or like a Choice Band, and can't really get that in sort of sets that would run like Sword Stance as well. So yeah, I think this is honestly, again, they're both pretty good just for different reasons. I think you could even make an argument that they're right next to each other personally, but again, I think that the space of difference does justify the fact that Garchomp is usable in more metagames than Mega Garchomp is. And not only that, but it's also been more usable in previous metagames than Mega Garchomp was. So when they're so clearly, when they're so closely aligned in terms of usage, I think it's going to be the defining factor. Also, regular Garchomp is a little bit better at defensive roles than Mega Garchomp is, because Mega Garchomp doesn't have access to stuff like Rough Skin and Rocky Helmet, or even if you pre-Mega into Rough Skin, you still don't have Rocky Helmet, so I think that's really a defining factor here. Next up is Baby Hippo. Baby Hippo gets 1 point above Trapinch, and it's purely for the fact that Trapinch's gimmick typically gets banned being Arena Trap, and Hippopotas's doesn't, being Sand. So I think the fact that this could be a really good budget PU Sand option is pretty good, or even if it's not PU, then NU at the very least. I think that alone just makes it at least better than Trapinch, because again, Trapinch's ability trapping typically gets banned. Next up is Hippowdon. Hippowdon definitely gets a really high B. This is one of those fringe OU Pokemon, but I think that unlike something like a Nidoking or Swampert, this actually consistently gets an OU. But unlike something like a Mega Swampert, this isn't a Pokemon you'd ever really see dominating OU. You're never going to see a meta where like Hippowdon is running the metagame. But you'll see a lot of metagames where Hippowdon's pretty usable. Even if it's not tiered in OU, it's still typically always like a B rank Pokemon or like B minus. So I gotta give Hippowdon quite literally, like its viability ranking says, a B. I think it just does enough. Next is Rhyperior. Rhyperior I think is going to be, actually this is probably going to be like right about the Celixes. It's typically a pretty viable RU Pokemon, and unlike something like a Rhydon, it doesn't need a Violite to be viable, and you can typically run this thing with like an Assault Vest, Leftovers, Life Orb even, sometimes Choice Items, but it's such a rarity in terms of singles at least. If you're playing doubles, obviously you get Dynamax out of this, and it's a pretty good weakness policy Dynamax user, especially in non-restricted metagames. So I think that personally Rhyperior is actually a pretty good Pokemon. Definitely rank it above the Celixes at least. However, I will say that Flygon's ability to actually have... Actually, no, never mind. I was going to say viability in Uber, so let's say it's like that D-rank Pokemon that can check one thing. I'm going to put it at least above Flygon. Gligar's a bit more consistent as far as, you know, its role in a lower tier format goes, so I'll give it that. Next up, though, we do have Gliscor. Gliscor is definitely a really good Pokemon. I'm going to rank this right below Mega Garchomp. I think the fact that Mega Garchomp is a much better breaker, which I think is a little bit better suited to the current metagame, gives at least the edge over Gliscor. However, at the very least, if nothing else, we do have a lot of good usage, in my opinion, from Gliscor. If we look at the OU tierings, obviously, Gliscor is an A+ Pokemon, and while I do acknowledge that it is ranked above both Garchomp and Mega Garchomp, personally, I actually don't really think that it's better than either. Again, might be a bit of a hot take, but I don't really value it above either Pokemon, personally. It's still objectively really good, and I think that Rain's definitely on a bit of a surge out, at least as far as viability goes. But, yeah, I mean, I think it's not bad. It's just one of those things where, like, I think that it's just personal preference. I don't think that Gliscor is, like, some tier definer or anything. But, agree to disagree, I guess. Mamoswine. Mamoswine's gonna go right between Hippowdon and Nidoking. Just because I quite literally think its usage in viability in terms of OUs or U's is between Hippowdon and Nidoking. Mamoswine's typically a Pokemon when it's in your U, it's one of the best. I didn't Nidoking this as well, but personally I value the typing and the priority that Mamoswine has in terms of viable priority, because you're not really running Sucker Punch and Nidoking a little bit more than Nidoking in my opinion. But again, they're so similar. In fact, these three in my opinion are pretty interchangeable, but again, Mamoswine I personally rate slightly above Nidoking, and I think that Hippowdon's weather puts it slightly above Mamoswine. We have Arceus Ground next. Arceus Ground goes right below Pedon. These are both like absolute titans, and I'll tell you right now, these are going to be the only Pokemon in S+. These Pokemon literally define the tier, and they're so evenly matched in my opinion, and I will say, not enough people give Arceus Ground credit, but this is an absolute monster at Ubers. There are metagames where Arceus Ground is even as viable or more viable than Pedon, especially as far as anything goes. This is usually like one of the top 5 Pokemon. I think there's a case for these two to actually be pretty rivaled in terms of skill, and I know a lot of people will say Pedon blows this out of the water, but those are the people that sit in the 1300s in Gen 7 Ubers, and they're not the people that actively ladder in the tier, in my personal opinion. If you really get above like the 1500s range, Pedon starts to lose a lot of its mandatoriness, and while it's definitely a fairly splashable Pokemon, Arceus Ground is one of those Pokemon that can definitely just take a lot of Pedon's roles. Something like a Zyger Complete can as well. So, might be a hot take, but I don't actually think that Pedon's that unrivaled in the tier. I think it has 2 rivals right here. And I guess I already did mention Zyger Complete, but this is another Pokemon I think that really, these 3 are the big 3 as far as ground types go. And I'd actually personally say they're all pretty even in terms of skill. Zyger Complete can definitely do a lot of Pedon's roles well, and I know I skipped ahead a lot, but we are on the topic anyway of Pedon rivals, and I think it'd be pretty absurd to bring it up later and like after like 15 more Pokemon. But yeah, no, I think it's Zaga Complete's, again, another Medicine Ubers. I think these three are all pretty even in skill. And while I know that obviously Zaga Complete is worse in the current Sword and Shield Ubers than Groudon, I think that as far as like a National Dex anything goes perspective goes, or just a National Dex tiering, or even Gen 7 Ubers for the last tier that these were viable in, I think that these three are the tier definers, and the only reason that regular Groudon is above is because of the fact that it's used to clear weather and it's used to check Zekrom. Things that Zaga Complete cannot do, and they coincidentally happen to favor the meta slightly more right now. But I think that as far as a Mon quality goes, Zaga Complete is better. Again, feel free to disagree. I understand that obviously Groudon regular has a lot of use in VGC right now, but if Primal Groudon was in that tier, regular Groudon would have no usage in VGC. Well, actually, that's a lie because it would be slightly better for Venusaur, but it would be such a niche thing because Primal Groudon would just live long enough for the game. So yeah, again, I feel free to agree to disagree. I know the Groudon wouldn't be unviable, but it would have a significant entry level. It would need a lot to actually get into play, in my opinion. And you'd really need to know what you're doing to really use Groudon over Primal Groudon, and you need a very specific team for it too. But anyway, next up is Excadrill. Excadrill, I can't lie, I'm going to put this at the bottom of A. Excadrill's quality has definitely gone down a lot in terms of OU, and stuff like rain is typically the better weather in a lot of different metagames these days. Now, sand is still pretty good, and I know that Drill is still a really good Pokemon. It could typically be like a Mold Breaker Spinner, but as far as the mandatoriness to run Drill in terms of an OU metagame, it's gone down a lot. You're not seeing like Gen 5 Drill or Gen 6 Drill where it's on every team as a sand team, and that's like the dominant weather. It's typically interchangeable with rain these days, and it depends on what's really common in the tier. But Drill has its moments, and I think that unlike Hippowdon, I know they're ranked similarly typically these days, but unlike Hippowdon, Drill still has other sets it could do if sand isn't the viable thing, and Hippowdon's really only job is to set sand and to be a Fizz-Def wall. Or if you're Joey Pokemon, I guess Choice Specs is the thing these days, or if you're Bird, Curse is the thing, which Curse is actually a pretty cool set in BDSP if you want to do it for Hippowdon. I know it's a bit off topic, we're talking about Drill, but Drill usually have like 3 different sets in any given metagame, being Mold Breaker Spinner, whether it's Spidef or Scarf, and then Sandra Sweeper. And I think that alone, again, I think that alone is really the difference in their tierings. Albeit, I think Drill will probably be the worst Pokemon as far as an A Pokemon goes, and Hippowdon will probably be the best as far as B goes. Next up is Seismitoad though. Seismitoad's pretty good. Again, one of these OU fluctuators. I do think it's better than Swampert at the very least, because at the very least it's had a metagame where it actually was nearly mandatory. I do think it's below Nidoking though, just because of the fact that Nidoking has a lot better staying power in my opinion. But Toad's still pretty good. I think the big thing as well is that in terms of defensive grounds, Toad has a lot of competition considering there are a lot of good defensive grounds. Even right now, as far as like a water absorb Pokemon goes, it's not even the best one considering Volcanion's actually taking that department. But I think it's a pretty good Pokemon. It's literally just better Gastrodon considering the fact this also has a better speed tier. It's typically a not bad niche rain Pokemon. And again, similar to how Drill has the advantage over Hippowdon because it has more than one role it can do in a tier, that's basically Gastrodon compared to Seismitoad. And since Seismitoad is like 3 or 4, and Gastrodon is the 1. Crocodile's up next. Not an OU fluctuator, but it's pretty on par with a lot of these. I'm going to put it right above Swampert, I think, because I think the defining line is that Swampert typically leans more UU, and the ones above Crook typically lean at least with potential to be OU or like cusp OU or have metagames where they're OU, like Mamoswine I'm pretty sure is BDSP OU, or at the very least it's like fringe BDSP OU. So I think that's really the difference there, in my personal opinion, whereas Crook is like the Pokemon that's definitively UU, and I think that Swampert just leans much more UU, but isn't as viable as Crocodile would be, in my personal opinion. So that's really a definer there. Next is Stunfisk. This is draft. Stunfisk could probably be like a C rank Pokemon in my opinion, but because it's not draft, sorry Draft League viewers, it's going to go right above Claydol. And Galar Stunfisk is going to be in the F rank. I'll put it above Whiscash at least, but it's still pretty terrible. Stunfisk is pretty good as far as low tier goes. I know that obviously, Static is pretty useful as far as low tier. It's pretty good PU ground type. Galar Stunfisk is just dog shit. You can't convince me this is a meta where it's viable in. You'd be lying to me. Golurk is a pretty good NU Pokemon. I'm going to rank this above Golem personally. Ghost ground typing is pretty useful as far as lower tiers go. And yeah, I mean, I think that Golurk is actually a pretty good just sponge as far as Fizz-Def Walling goes in the tier. But yeah, there's not a lot to say. Golurk's a pretty good option as well with Choice Band with like No Guard, Poltergeist plus Dynamic Punch and Stone Edge. Has a lot of moves to take advantage of this gen actually. I think it's probably the better ability, but even still has some good Iron Fist options. Wouldn't really run Klutz. It's pretty terrible, but it's there, I guess. Next up though, we have Landorus Incarnate. Landorus Incarnate is an S-rank Pokemon, and I'm actually going to put Landorus Theory in there as well. While I know that Landorus Theory is an OU Pokemon, this is a Pokemon that literally is objectively one of, if not the best Pokemon in every single OU it's touched. And I think that tiering it in the same range as stuff like Garchomps and Dugtrio is actually a disgrace, considering even when Dugtrio was getting banned, it was never like an S+ rank Pokemon. It's just a Pokemon that people didn't like playing against. And I think that's really the difference in terms of why Dugtrio is at A rank, and Landorus, despite being in a lower tier, is tiered above it on this. I think that personally is a lot more indicative of Landorus' viability. Landorus is a Pokemon you'll see running VGC, you'll see it running OU, you'll see it running Natdex. It's even viable in Ubers this generation, which is something you cannot say about Dugtrio, because Dugtrio is shit in Ubers. I think that tiering these two in the same tier would be an absolute disgrace to Landorus, in my opinion. I think that Landorus, even as a case to be above, Landorus Theory, even as a case to be above Landorus Incarnate, but because of the fact these are both Ubers and Landorus Incarnate is not completely horseshit this generation in Ubers, Landorus Incarnate gets the pass just because it was actually bad in there. But objectively speaking, I still probably think the Therian's better. I'm just going to give it the pass to the... Actually, no, I'm not going to give it the pass. I tiered Skyman lower in the last tier list. I think it would be a crime to not tier Landorus Incarnate lower. When again, Landorus Therian has Uber's viability, unlike Landorus Incarnate, which is, while it's viable, it's like C-rank viable. Not only that, but Landorus Therian also is viable in a lot of other formats, a lot of other, even just doubles, which is a huge thing that Incarnate can't really do for most VGC metas. Though, I will acknowledge there have been some metagames where Incarnate, because of Sheer Force finally being legal this generation, has had surges, and I do recognize that, but Therian is typically the better option. Diggersby gets a C rank. I'll put it right below Nidoqueen. Simply one of those like UU RU Pokemon. I'm pretty sure this ends up getting like banned from RU if I remember correctly. Like it's some UUBL Pokemon. UUBL. But I think the difference is that Nidoqueen actually has potential to typically surge into the UQ range depending on where Nidoking is tiered. Diggersby really will always just be like an RUBL Pokemon in my opinion. Next up is Zygarde. Zygarde's definitely an S rank Pokemon. Literally, it's like the bottom of this tier. Actually, no, that's a lie. I think I'm gonna put it right above Landorus Incarnate because I think the difference is that Landorus Incarnate will always just be a pretty hard Pokemon to justify in Ubers. But if Zygarde Complete didn't exist, Zygarde at the very least would have a justification to use it. It's just completely outclassed by Complete, but Zygarde would at least not be a horseshit Pokemon in Ubers because Dazzanaris is a pretty good move. That's really the only justification I can give it. You could really switch these around either way, and I don't think I would bat an eyelash, but I think it's at least the one reason that Zygarde base can be ranked above Landorus Incarnate. Zygarde Dog, on the other hand, this is going to go right below Diggersby. I know Zygarde Dog is another one of those like UU Pokemon, but I'll be honest, this thing fluctuates so much in its tiering, I can't really say it's like a consistently really good UU Pokemon. Maybe the meta's changed. I still think Nidoking offers more to UU, I'll be honest. I think it's just the fact that Nidoking is currently tiered there, that it's not in the tier. And as far as Diggersby goes, again, it's a fringe Pokemon. I think a Zygarde 10 is also a fringe Pokemon personally, but agree to disagree. Right now, I'm putting it in C. Mudsteel's definitely just a D rank Pokemon, though I'll put it at the top of D. It's just a really good Phys-Def ground as far as low tier goes. I'm pretty sure this is like an RU NU Pokemon right now. Yeah, it's looking like it's an NU Pokemon right now, which makes sense. Anything that's basically though tiered definitively consistently right below Alolan and Sandshrew, I can't really justify putting there. And while I acknowledge that stuff like Gastrodon and Quag is probably tiered there right now, they have surges at least, so Mudsteel never really surges to like a UU tier or something like that though. Palossand, I love Palossand a lot. I think it's a good Pokemon. Sadly though, this isn't a draft tier list, so I have to tier it where it belongs, which is right below Stunfisk. Because the very least, Stunfisk is a pretty good PU tier definer. Palossand, if I remember correctly, isn't even in PU right now, which says a lot. I'm actually scrolling to find, yeah, it's not even in PU right now, which is really sad. But I know it's one of those Pokemon that has some merit in the tier, depending on like what meta you've played PU in. But I would act like this is amazing. Claydol, I will acknowledge Claydol is in a higher tier than Palossand. I still think Claydol is an objectively worse Pokemon. Stunfisk being a ground type that has recovery, I think already sits it above. But that's really where I'll end the discussion. I think, again, they're pretty interchangeable. Next up, Silvally Ground. Silvally, if it was all types, would be higher on this list, but because it's subjectively Silvally Ground, I'm going to put it right above Torterra. Silvally is a ground type. This is one of Silvally's better types, to be fair, but just as a sole ground type, this is really just an okay Pokemon. For what it's worth, Pure Ground is a pretty good typing as far as low tier goes, especially being a specially offensive one, is pretty much in its favor. Though you could definitely go with Physical. Actually, no, I'm pretty sure multi-attack's Physical, right? Volley, Ground. Does this have a Physical ground move, actually? Yes, this would most likely be mixed or Physical. You could definitely just go with like a utility-based set with stuff like Default Parting Shot. You can go with a more offensive set with stuff like Sword Dance with multi-attack. It's pretty good. I think this has a lot of options, but I think specifically speaking as a pure ground type, actually that's a disservice to put it below. I'm going to put it at the top of D. This is definitely, in my opinion, one of the better Savali types, but it's definitely not cracking like the Steelix barrier in my personal opinion. Next up we have Sandaconda. Sandaconda is pretty shit, but it's at Sand, so it gets to be above Trapinch. It's at Sand less consistently in a Poppet Toss, though, because of the fact you need to make contact with this Pokemon. Though, I will say that can be beneficial if you're playing a physical attacker. However, the fact that you need to make a Pokemon that plays you... Well, you need to face a Pokemon that makes contact fight you. I think, objectively speaking, tiers are at least below Poppet Toss, which could, in a last ditch, set Sand with no drawback. Gigantamax, Sandaconda up next, I guess. I threw this on here because I wanted to just mention that this is also a pretty shit Pokemon as far as Gigantamax goes. I guess I'll put it bottom of C just because it's a Dynamax. But, like, this is a pretty terrible Pokemon still. Like, to put it in perspective, I couldn't even tell you what the max move does. I'm pretty sure it's just, like, Fire Spin. It's still really terrible, though. Cole's move is better. Runerigus is not terrible. It's just worse than Golurk, in my opinion. I'm gonna probably put it, like, literally right below Golurk, I'll be honest. I think Trick Room Aspect's pretty cool. Has a bunch of hazards. That's pretty cool. Finally, though, we have Ursaluna. Now, Ursaluna, as even just off of what stuff like Ursaring would provide, which Ursaring does provide a lot of different moves already for it. Stuff like Earthquake, Close Combat. Even if we don't count Return, it's like Double Edge, which is pretty amazing. Gets a fuck ton of coverage. And even if you cut all those stuff like Tutors, for example, stuff like Earthquake is pretty mandatory. Stuff like Crunch is pretty mandatory. Stuff like Facade is pretty mandatory, especially in Guts. So already this has enough tools to where it could survive even if you cut out the Tutor moves. This would still be a very viable Pokemon. Its bulk is obnoxious, its abilities are amazing. This is honestly, in my opinion, probably going to be the second best Pokemon as far as I rank goes. Ursaluna, when it gets introduced, I think will be definitively OU Pokemon, and I think that I've kind of come around on this being one of the best Pokemon from Legends Arceus. This might even be the best one, to be honest. I think it's even better than Anamoris in hindsight. But yeah, I think that Ursaluna honestly is one of those like really slept on Pokemon from PLA. But the second you've ever used it once in terms of like a PLA format tier, which there are some you could actually play on, but if you've ever used this even once in terms of a PLA meta, you'll realize this Pokemon is absolutely absurd to KO, and it's always going to claim like 3 kills in a game. This Pokemon would probably be one of the better Pokemon as far as an OU goes, actually, and it might be one of the first ground types, in my personal opinion, to actually give Landorus competition. Because one of the things this does offer is it's a physical ground type that doesn't worry about status because of Guts. And not only that, but it's a physical ground type that can't really get burned, which I know is pretty similar, but not lowering your attack is pretty huge. It's a ground type that can also cover Landorus with stuff like Ice Punch, which is pretty cool. I know that's a tutor, to be fair, but even still, if the tutor does get reintroduced, that's there. And if not, I mean, Guts Boosted Facade is still going to break off of like 140 attack stab. That's pretty amazing still. Landorus probably wouldn't take more than like 2 hits from that. Not only this, but Ursaluna also being able to just have as good defensive stats as it does. Because if we look at Ursaluna's stat line, for anyone who's unaware, the current stat line is 130 HP, 105 physical defense, and 80 speed F. And even if you just run this like an Assault Vest set, it's still pretty obnoxious to kill, and you can still go with Guts to try and use this as a status absorber. Also, Nerve is a pretty good ability on this as well if you're going with like a Trick Room Sweeper and you're trying to get around berries. However, Guts 80% of the time will probably just be the better option. The point being though, is that I think that Ursaluna might be the first ground type in a while to really give Landorus competition. I think the one thing that's going to be out of its favor is the fact that it's not a Stealth Rocker. However, if it doesn't, getting Stealth Rocks through like a TR or something, because this wasn't really an option in its move pool, because Ursaring never got Stealth Rocks. But if this Pokemon does get Stealth Rocks in any later generation it's introduced in, I think that Ursaluna might end up actually being the first Pokemon in a while to really rival Landorus Theory, in my opinion. Maybe that might be overzealous, but let me know what you guys think down below, and let me know if you agree or disagree with the tier list. If you guys enjoyed this, leave a like and subscribe. And with that said, let me know what you want to see next type-wise, and I'll see you guys in Monday's video. Until then, peace out, guys.